Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. In 1970, the term Black September was coined in an Arab against Arab context, Jordanians against Palestinians. The PLO was beaten by the Hashemites and fled to Lebanon, establishing it and attacking Israel from the north. Fast forward 54 years, and Hezbollah, Israel's most potent hostile neighbor, has just suffered its own Black September in 4 days of consecutive blows in Beirut and throughout Lebanon. It responded by extending the range of its standoff attacks, which he started almost a year ago, but is yet to use its precision-guided missiles or trying to strike Tel Aviv. So is this just a higher intensity campaign or the prelude to a full-scale war involving cross-border movements? Joining us here in the studio, Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisen, formerly the director of the ICT at Reichman University, still a senior fellow there, of course, nonetheless, formerly also a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate, and we won't go into the entire curriculum vitae, Miri, since we won't end today's program. It's a pleasure. Brigadier General in Reserve Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's good to have you here as well, sir.
Thank you.
Ambassador Dani Ayalon, formerly Deputy Foreign Minister, as well as Ambassador to Washington. It's good to have you here, Dani. And Mr. Amir Oren, our TV7 Editor-at-Large. Mr. Oren, take it away.
Well, obviously, in war colleges or other departments of political science all over the world, they are going to change their curriculum in order to comprise what is happening now between Israel and Hezbollah. It's going to be quite a case study of how you coerce, but you have your state to non-state conversations, signals via firepower. One side escalates somewhat without breaking all of the ground rules, waiting for the other side to respond. Each side can, on the moment's notice, go from a war of attrition to a full-scale war. But as of now, what we have seen is much more of the same, but not something entirely different.
Indeed. Well, what we're seeing in the last couple of weeks is the exhaustion of two separate policies, namely one by the United States under the Biden administration, the second by the State of Israel, which has been subject to roughly 11 months of cross-border attacks by this Iranian proxy Hezbollah towards its northern communities, forcing, of course, the displacement of almost a year of roughly 61,000 Israelis who have been displaced based on the government's request, as well as another roughly 30 to 40,000 that have left on their own volition. Ambassador Ayalon, when we're looking at the current disagreement, let's call it that way, on the means to an end. Israel wants to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701 to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River on the one hand, and it does not necessarily see the diplomatic prism or course of action as very successful. On the other hand, we're hearing a relentless stand of the position of the Biden administration saying, no, it needs to be a diplomatic push because any military adventurism may cause a broader escalation, something that naturally nobody wants.
Right. Well, of course, the American strategic interest is to avoid a larger war in the Middle East, but the political considerations loom very large. Just a few weeks before elections, the Biden administration does not need any, runaway of the situation, losing control. That could really be devastating to their campaign. Hence, we see a major push on Israel not to enlarge the war. Not that it's necessarily Israel's interest to do that, but it may come to a point of no choice. As you mentioned, Jonathan, 61,000 or more refugees in their own home, Israelis from the northern border towns. This is not sustainable. Had we been told 11 months ago that this would be the situation after 11 months, nobody would believe it, and still is the case. So it comes to a point where the Israeli government has to make a decision, preferably to bring back the situation in the northern border to the status quo ante, as they may say, but without the Hezbollah on our border, actually implementing United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701. There is still a way to do it diplomatically if Israel will consider saving face of the Hezbollah by making some minor corrections in the border, as Hezbollah always demanded. If this will take Hezbollah up north and adhering to the letter and the spirit of 1701, it may be in Israel's advantage, and also keeping very good relations with the United States. Because if Israel launches a war, the US will no doubt continue and cooperate and defend us, but it will create in the long run, major friction between Israel and United, especially if Kamala Harris, the deputy of Biden, will be elected. Nobody knows at this point. So I think Israel's preference would be to give Amos Hochstein, the presidential envoy and the one overseeing the negotiations between Israel, not directly, of course, and Hezbollah, to give a diplomatic solution a chance. If this is not the case, the dilemma will be both Israel's, Hezbollah's, and also Tehran's.
Indeed. Just to put things in perspective for our viewers, 1701 is not viable because it doesn't only speak about pushing back Hezbollah north of the Litani River. There are a lot of various clauses in there that have to do with the domestic Lebanese structure, which was supposed to diminish Hezbollah's military footprint in Lebanon, something that, of course, under Iranian guidance and sway was just taken out of the picture, and unfortunately the Lebanese people are bearing the brunt. But Colonel Eisen, when we're looking at the Israeli interests here, the United States, if we're talking practically, told Israel to not strike Lebanese civilian infrastructure and do not strike Beirut, namely Dahya. Of course, Israel has the capacity to go after those responsible for the 1983 bombings. So it found that loophole, making it possible for it to strike those who are on the most wanted list of the United States. But nonetheless, engaging Hezbollah in an asymmetric, non-military necessarily, but much more precise, if we're talking about the walkie-talkie and the pager strikes, and then subsequently also the strike on Aqil, who was one of the leaders who perpetrated the atrocities, not only against the United States that brought about the murder of 241 service members, but also there were a couple dozen French service members who were murdered and others. Can Israel work within that very tough constraint that has been imposed on it in order to reach its objectives nonetheless?
I absolutely think that Israel has slightly changed in a way very important to me, the way that we address these issues. Because over this last week, we've seen Israel being not only preemptive in the strikes, meaning making the choice, doing the strikes in a very exceptional way, but we are adding into the strikes information. What are we doing right now that we did not do in the past? We're saying this is what we attacked. This is who they are. This is what they've committed. We're clearly defining who they are and what they did. We're showing the weaponry that we are attacking. We're showing the weaponry in the houses, in the civilian areas. We're giving early warning and saying, civilians, you're living next to cache of weapons, move, because we're going to attack the cache of weapons. But we're showing those weapons. We're not just saying that they're there. For me, that is the way that you can justify, and I use that word very carefully, where you're going in to attack the enormous terror army that Hezbollah has built over the last 30 years with the absolute backing help of its benefactor, the Islamic regime of Iran, and the uncovering of a cruise missile quite near the Israeli border, in the area crossed by 1701. These are stages that we need to show it and that we're doing so. I mean, you want to go at this stage, it's just a UAV, it's just a rocket. Cruise missiles, so near in that sense, 300 kilometers, that they can use those. This is the way to show what Hezbollah is, what we are attacking, and to get past what is at the end attacking in civilian areas. That's exactly where Hezbollah is embedded. You have to show where they're embedded, show their weaponry, show what they've done in the past. And that I think we're doing much better now.
Absolutely. General Sofrin, if I think about last week, it was a paradigm shift. It brought about a tactical victory for Israel. It established Hezbollah between Iraq and a very hard place. On the one hand, it does not have the interest on going to war with Israel because in the short to medium, even though it's predominantly short term, its capacity to wage war in a efficient manner has been disrupted. When we're talking about Iranian interest to lose its most potent asset in Lebanon, obviously there is no such interest at this point in time, unless Iran indeed pursues the breakout to a nuclear weapon. And there is no true horizon, at least according to the latest statement coming out of Washington, to a negotiated solution for cessation of hostilities, be it temporary or not, for the release of hostages in exchange for Israeli concessions. Where do we find Hezbollah at this point with its back against a wall? Are we now to see basically Israel exploit that as much as possible until the point where it has a better starting point to wage war against Hezbollah in a high intensity capacity, or are we now seeing a certain tit for tat in a higher intensity that is just going to prolong on and on?
When you look at Hezbollah today, I think that Hassan Nasrallah is now caught in a very weak point. He lost his most, let's say, experienced military advisors. Now he settles only with what we call the second grade, meaning Khalal Tami and Talal Khami and, of course, Ali Karaki, which are less experienced and less skilled than the others, meaning Ibrahim Akil and Fuad Shukur, who were assassinated. That means he has less people to consult with. He has to make up his own decisions. The Iranians are pressuring him not to go too far, not to go to a certain kind of, to extend the war with Israel, so it will be totally damaged, because we didn't build your capacity for fighting for the Sunnis in Gaza, but only to assist us if Israel is going to engage us directly, and you are going to be the first respond. So maintain your capabilities and don't escalate, because you don't want to go into a larger war with Israel, because you're going to be totally damaged. On the other hand, Nasrallah gave a speech on Thursday, and he kept on linking the northern front to Gaza. He still goes with the same equation that as long as the fighting in Gaza goes on, I will go on fighting at the northern front. That means if you are going to stop the war at Gaza, I'm going to cease the fire at the northern front. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to go into a larger escalation. On the other hand, I believe that Israel doesn't want to go there either. That means Israel is now trying to press him to go to some diplomatic agreement on what we call some terms that will enable him to save face on one hand, to get some concessions along the borderline between Israel. There are 13 points of friction between, or disagreement between Israel and Lebanon, or the Lebanese government, not Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is, of course, the defender of the southern Lebanon. And therefore, it will enable them, first of all, to save face, to go back in somehow, to get the concessions, and hopefully that this will bring the end to this round, but we're going to face it one more time in a few years.
Hezbollah may define itself as a defender of Lebanon. Some may call it Hezbollah Shaitan, or there are different nicknames for this organization, but southern Lebanon has been destroyed so many times because of this group. Defender it's not. Mr. Owen.
Hezbollah cannot defend Lebanon. It cannot defend Hezbollah, as we saw. And one wonders whether Nasrallah believes that Hezbollah can defend Nasrallah, whether he's next, whether he was spared by Israel for some reason. Israel, perhaps the way he perceives it, could have reached him and decided not to. So he's left wondering. Now, because, as Amnon Sofrin said, Nasrallah insisted that the center of gravity has not shifted north, as the Israeli officials said, but it is still in Gaza. One wonders. Scientists are always trying to find the hidden laws of the universe. Could there be a hidden back channel between the United States and Iran, in which the Americans, the way they did starting in Oman and Qatar early in the last decade, started mediating those countries in the Gulf, started mediating between, at that time, Obama, whose vice president was Biden, of course, and Khamenei, through various people, whether there is some secret agreement to try and tone down the rhetoric and contain the shooting war between Israel and Hezbollah so that it does not escalate into a cross-border ground movement. There are reports out of Tehran that Khamenei decided that he does want to renew the dialogue with Washington. Of course, he is waiting to see the election results, but it is no coincidence that what one would have expected, the reaction out of Nasrallah, or out of Hezbollah in general, after the pages, even before the walkie-talkies, even before Akil and the entire Radwan chain of command, would have been the precision-guided missiles on Tel Aviv. And lo and behold, it didn't happen. So if Biden manages, through the good services of Bill Burns of the CIA and others, to keep the regional war from erupting for the next month and a half, it would mean that there is something brewing.
I thought it was a rhetorical question whether or not there is an agreement between Washington and Tehran to a certain degree, knowing the people involved from Brett McGurk to the other people, of course. But nonetheless, when we're looking at the broad scheme of things, the United States is, of course, in an age of strategic competition. Since March of 2021, when Wang Yi told Blinken that they're now regarding themselves as near-peer nations or peer nations and let the strategic power competition begin, we see there is a growing understanding for the adversaries of the United States, be it Russia and China, to provide a certain backing to the Iranians in order to try and strip the United States from its capacity to posture in an effective manner, so to speak. Be it now in the Sea of Japan, where we saw Russia and China conducting the joint maneuver, drawing the United States to basically withdraw one of its USS strike forces or aircraft carriers from the Middle East, and therefore the United States had to send a different airstrike carrier in order to accommodate this challenge and leaving a certain gap that would diminish Israel's capacity to receive all of the backing that the United States promised to grant it. How does it maneuver within this complex reality?
Well, I would say to add to these joint maneuvers of China and Russia in the South China Sea, in the Japanese Sea, we also see some provocations which we have not seen for many years, whereby strategic bombers of Russia are flying by very close to Alaska. And all these things, I think, are bringing us to a situation of the old Cold War. If in the old Cold War, where the US and the American-led coalition, the Western world, against the Soviet world, led by, of course, the Kremlin and Moscow, we see today almost the same situation, the same geopolitics, except with different actors. We have Russia, we have China, and unfortunately, what we do see here is that these two countries have very strong regional allies, like North Korea in Asia and Iran in the Middle East. So this certainly makes a new calculation in Washington, D.C. Granted, for the short time, they want to see it quiet, and it's not inconceivable at all that what Amir said, that there are some talks, a back channel between Washington and Tehran. This is very logical. It has happened before. It is both within these two actors' interest to do that and calm down the situation. Everybody is waiting for the results of the elections in the United States.
So are the Iranians.
Exactly. Come November 5th, the Chinese, the Russians, everyone else. And I believe a lot will depend who will be in Washington, because this may be two really divergent policies vis-a-vis China, Russia, and also Iran. So we are still here now in a kind of a limbo. And I believe near as they can, the Americans will continue to press hard against a major escalation or a regional conflict.
Colonel Eisen, when we're looking at the Russian and Chinese assistance to the Iranians, be it via military means, it's not only military means, it's also diplomatic. We see in international fora, they never cease to miss an opportunity to gain a public condemnation rhetoric. I can go down that line with different words for that, but nonetheless, it seems like Russia and China are not hiding their support of Iran at the expense of Israel. Are we, detached from the United States in this context, doing enough in order to counterbalance these activities?
One of the things that surprises everybody is that we still have direct flights from Israel to Moscow. I want to remind us, we haven't disconnected from Russia. We haven't disconnected from the Kremlin. We still have an ambassador there. So in that sense, it isn't as, everything's very polarized right now. But the either or that Danny just kind of presented, even the either or, I'm kind of hearing from you, Jonathan, we all know it's more complex. You can have both diplomacy and other actions. Perhaps the terms that I'm looking at right now are that Israel is escalating to create de-escalation. That what we're doing is a term that I'm going to call coercive diplomacy, where you're actually doing military actions and you're trying to get diplomatic rewards out of it. It's not contradictory. So I think that having those additional channels, I think that years ago when we had for a short while, Prime Minister Bennett tried to use that relationship that Israel has with Russia to go down that path. It didn't go anywhere, but I'm saying that's still there. Let's not ignore it. I think that Israel has been doing immense attacks in Lebanon. When you attack in Lebanon, you're really close to Syria. And in Syria, you still have lots of Russian forces. You can't act there without some kind of basic coordination. So I wouldn't look at it just in that way. We have diplomatic ties with China. Okay, so North Korea is off the table, but I do think that those are things that are in the background, and you keep those on the table. Having said all of that, I want to say from my point of view, there is no change for Israel's strategic asset being our diplomatic relationship, our full, not just diplomatic relationship with the United States of America. That's the team that we're on. But that doesn't mean that you only act on your team. You look at it more broadly.
General Sofrin, Ahl al-Haq and Kataib Hezbollah and various members of the Hashd al-Shabi, or the Popular Mobilization Forces, have pledged to support Hezbollah following the devastation that befell it last week. It launched over the course of 24 hours over 5 attacks against Israel. We're seeing the Houthis in Yemen also ratchet up their rhetoric towards Israel with pledges of sending additional forces into Syria, where it already has certain contingencies operational. Are we expected to see this escalate on a multi-front type of war, but narrowly directed towards the northern theater for fear of those various organizations, that it may draw them into a miscalculation that may frustrate Iranian aspirations in other theaters?
I believe that if Israel is going to attack Lebanon, namely Hezbollah, not Lebanon, the country, but Hezbollah is located in Lebanon, it won't be a fight only between Israel and Hezbollah. I believe that Hash al-Sha'bi, part of the organizations that under this roof will come to assist Hezbollah. I know that some of them has made a tour along our borders together with Hezbollah commanders to get acquainted with the terrain, to get acquainted with the area, to be able to get in whenever it's needed. You have the Taliban from Afghanistan who declared that they are going to join the fighting and to assist Hezbollah as well, even though I don't give it too much weight.
Right.
But on the other hand, we have the Iranians. The Iranians will not allow us to demolish Hezbollah. They will interfere. So if you are going to get into Lebanon, we can define that we are going to get to the Litani River and stop there, but it's not up to us, because everybody will join in, and we are going to have what we call a multi-arena fighting with all the different proxies of Iran surrounding us, and it's not going to be a walk in the park.
A walk in the park it won't be, but neither would it be for them, and the power disparity remains at Israel's advantage if we take the whole big picture. With that, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our production today. Mr. Oren, Ambassador Ayalon, Colonel Eisen, and General Sofrin, thank you so very much for your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.